God is forcing you out of that room right now. And the first sign was not chaos. It was that strange, heavy urge to pull back from people you used to love. You looked at a simple text invitation, and instead of feeling excited, you felt a knot of dread in your stomach. You sat in familiar spaces and felt tired before anyone even said anything. This is what most people misread. They call it moodiness, they call it moodiness, they call it burnout. They call it you being distant. But what if heaven has made the old room too small for who you are becoming? And what happens if you keep trying to fit anyway? If this is your confirmation, type I release the old room below, like this video, and subscribe so you do not miss what God is revealing next. Let me say this as clearly as I can. What you are feeling is not random. And for many of you, it is not depression the way people around you keep naming it. It is not you becoming cold. It is not you turning arrogant. It is not you losing your ability to love. It is not proof that something is wrong with your heart. It is a divine eviction. God is disrupting your comfort with environments that used to fit because they cannot carry your next level without crushing it. That is why your spirit has become restless in ordinary places. That is why conversations that used to feel easy now feel like labor. That is why your body gets tired around people who are not evil, not monstrous, not even necessarily against you, but who still require a version of you that no longer exists. And that part matters, because one of the deepest guilt traps in this season is that the people you are outgrowing are not always bad people. Sometimes they were kind to you. Sometimes they stood by you in an earlier chapter. Sometimes they loved the version of you that survived, smiled, adjusted, explained, tolerated, absorbed, and stayed small enough to keep everybody comfortable. So when heaven starts pulling you out, the pain gets complicated. If they had clearly betrayed you, leaving would feel cleaner. If they had openly attacked you, withdrawing would feel easier. But when the season is ending around good but draining people, you start accusing yourself. You say, why do I feel this way? Why do I not want to go? Why does my chest tighten when their name comes up on my phone? Why does my energy sink just thinking about being there for 2 hours? What kind of person pulls away from people who did not do anything terrible? A person who has changed. A person whose spirit has become allergic to shrinking. A person heaven is repositioning, and this is where most people make the mistake that keeps them trapped longer than necessary. They think guilt is proof they're doing something wrong. But guilt in a transition season is often just the emotional fog that rises when your new boundaries collide with old access. That fog is real. It feels heavy. It feels cruel. It feels like you are abandoning people. But feelings are not always verdicts. Sometimes they are withdrawal symptoms from a role you were never meant to keep forever. You were not born to be permanently available to every version of everyone's expectations. You were not called to keep translating your soul to people committed to relating only to your old self. You were not anointed to spend the rest of your life making your growth look less offensive. Listen carefully. Some rooms do not become wrong because they became wicked. Some rooms become wrong because they became complete. And completed seasons can still break your heart. That is why this hurts. Because a part of you still remembers the laughter. A part of you still remembers what it meant back then. A part of you still wants to be the kind person, the loyal friend, the easy family member, the one who keeps showing up and never changes the tone of the room. But every time you force yourself back into that space now, something in you pays for it. You know exactly what I mean. You can feel it before you even arrive. That text message comes through. They ask if you are coming. It is a normal invitation. Nothing dramatic, nothing offensive. Just the same plan, the same place, the same faces. And yet your stomach drops. Not because you hate them. Not because you are too good for them. But because your spirit already knows you are about to betray yourself for the sake of familiarity. That dread is not always fear. Sometimes it is discernment. Sometimes it is your body telling the truth before your mouth is ready to say it. And if you have been judging yourself for that physical reaction, release that judgment right now. Because the body often registers spiritual suffocation before the mind has language for it. That exhaustion you keep feeling in familiar environments is not laziness. It is not drama. It is not you being antisocial. It is the cost of atmosphere. There are rooms that do not attack your body with visible violence. They attack you with invisible compression. They require edits. They require self-monitoring. They require silence where truth wants to rise. They require laughter when your spirit is grieving. They require politeness when your discernment is screaming. They require you to speak a language you have already outgrown. And when you sit in that kind of room long enough, you leave tired in a way sleep cannot fix. You know what that feels like. You sit at the table, everybody is talking, everybody is familiar. On the outside, nothing is wrong. But inside, you feel like you are speaking a completely different language than everyone else. The things they celebrate do not move you anymore. The things they mock now wound you. The things they avoid are the very things God has been showing you in private. So you sit there translating yourself, editing your reactions, shrinking your intensity, trimming your honesty, trying not to disturb the emotional temperature of the room. And then you go home exhausted, not because the evening was loud, because it was false. You spent hours holding back the real size of what is happening in you, and the spirit pays a price for prolonged self-erasure. Stay with me, because this next part explains why heaven sometimes lets that exhaustion get worse. God will often make an old environment feel unbearably tight when He is trying to stop you from decorating a place you were only meant to exit. Read that again in your spirit. He will make the room feel smaller. He will remove your appetite for it. He will let the old conversations feel dry. He will expose the performance hidden inside your participation. He will allow you to become uncomfortable enough that staying starts to cost more than leaving. That is the eviction notice. Not always a dramatic collapse. Not always a public betrayal. Not always a slammed door. Sometimes the divine eviction notice arrives as loss of taste, loss of ease, loss of capacity, loss of tolerance for what you used to endure just to avoid being misunderstood. And yes, it can feel lonely, because the old room may still be open while your spirit is no longer allowed to live there. That is one of the hardest places to be. When the invitation is still there, but the permission is gone. When they still expect your presence, but heaven has withdrawn your peace. When you can physically go back, but every cell in your body is warning you that re-entry would be self-abandonment. This is why some of you have been crying over ordinary things. Not because the invitation was deep, because the decision behind it was. You were not grieving one dinner, one conversation, one gathering, one friendship pattern, one role in the family. You were grieving the end of an identity, the agreeable one, the always available one, the one who could sit anywhere and survive anything, the one who made everybody else comfortable even when it meant going numb. But that version of you cannot go where God is taking you. And that is why He is forcing the issue now. Because what is coming next in your life requires more truth than that old room could tolerate. It requires stronger boundaries, cleaner air, more silence, less explaining, more discernment, and a deeper loyalty to what God is doing in you than to what people are used to receiving from you. That is not elitism. That is stewardship. You are not becoming too difficult to love. You are becoming too honest to be consumed. There is a difference. The fear underneath this transition is real though. Let's name it. Some of you are scared that if you stop overextending, nobody will stay. If you stop smoothing everything over, nobody will understand you. If you stop being easy to access, you will end up alone. If you stop attending every familiar room, your absence will expose how replaceable you were. And because that fear is so deep, the temptation is to return early, to answer the text, to go to the dinner, to laugh on cue, to flatten your voice, to shave down your thoughts, to put your old face back on for one more night so nobody feels your shift too directly. But every time you do that now, the recovery gets longer. Have you noticed? You come back drained for a day, then 2, then 3. You need silence after simple interactions. You need space after ordinary conversations. You need to sit alone just to hear yourself again. That is not dysfunction. That is a sign your spirit is fighting to keep what God has been growing in private. Because you cannot keep absorbing atmospheres that oppose your expansion and expect to stay clear. And the part nobody warns you about is this. The more an environment trained you to shrink, the guiltier you will feel when you finally stop shrinking. Not because you're wrong, because the old system was built around your accommodation. Once you change, everybody feels it. The friend group feels it. The family dynamic feels it. The workplace feels it. The people who relied on your silence feel it. The people who felt safe around your self-betrayal feel it. And many of them will not have language for what is happening. They will just say you changed, and they will be right. You did, thank God. You changed enough to notice that peace is holy. You changed enough to realize that access is not love. You changed enough to understand that closeness without alignment can become a quiet form of suffocation. You changed enough to stop calling depletion loyalty. Now, this does not mean you become petty. It does not mean you make an announcement. It does not mean you punish people for being from a chapter you have completed. Spiritual maturity does not need a dramatic exit. It needs clarity. It needs restraint. It needs dignity. Some exits are holier when they are quiet. Some separations stay cleaner when they are not over-explained. Some doors close best without speeches from the hallway. And we are going to go deeper into that, because there is a reason God is warning you not to explain this transition to everyone. But before we even get there, I need you to release one lie. You are not abandoning your life. You are outgrowing a container. You are not failing at relationships. You are responding to spiritual climate. You are not becoming loveless. You are becoming unavailable for what keeps draining your oil. That is a holy distinction. And once you understand it, something in your chest starts to loosen, because now the isolation makes sense. Now the restlessness makes sense. Now the fatigue makes sense. Now the withdrawal makes sense. Now the silence makes sense. You are not disappearing. You are being separated for repositioning. And the real shift did not begin when you left physically. It began the moment your spirit stopped fitting emotionally. That is why today feels so sharp. Because heaven is no longer letting you pretend that you still belong in rooms that require your diminishment. The eviction has already begun. And in the next part, we need to talk about why explaining your exit to the wrong people can delay your peace, and why the empty space you are afraid of is not dead space at all. Now let's go where this gets even more serious. Because once God starts forcing you out of an old room, the next temptation is almost always the same. You want to explain. You want to make the exit sound gentle enough to be accepted. You want to find the perfect words so nobody misreads your silence. You want to soften the distance so nobody feels rejected. You want to sit down with people and make them understand that this is not hatred, not pride, not rebellion, not coldness. You want them to know your heart. You want them to see that you are not trying to hurt them. You want them to understand that something has changed inside you that you did not create by yourself. But here is the hard truth. Not every person deserves an explanation for a shift they are committed to misreading. And if you do not learn that, you will spend the whole transition bleeding language into people who have already chosen their version of your silence. This is the silence phase. And the silence phase is not punishment, it is protection, because there are seasons where explanation does not create peace. It creates negotiation. It creates access. It creates argument. It creates opportunities for people to pull you back into a version of yourself that heaven already canceled. You say, I just want to be mature, but what many people call maturity is actually over-explaining from guilt. It is trying to earn the right to leave. It is trying to exit without anybody forming an opinion. It is trying to manage the emotional weather in a room you are no longer called to live in. And that is exhausting. Look at how this happens in real life. You already know you do not have the same capacity anymore. You already know every gathering leaves you drained. You already know the family dinner turns into a quiet performance where you have to shrink your personality just to keep the peace. You already know the old friend group wants the entertaining version of you, the endlessly available version of you, the version that does not challenge the emotional habits of the room. But instead of simply stepping back, you start preparing a defense. You rehearse speeches in your head. You build soft explanations. You try to sound loving enough, grateful enough, humble enough, understandable enough, and deep down, what are you really trying to do? You are trying to leave without triggering anybody else's discomfort. But that is impossible because your growth is already a disturbance to people who are settled in your old size. So hear me. You do not need a courtroom-quality argument to obey what God is closing. You do not need unanimous understanding to honor your spirit. You do not need everybody to bless your withdrawal before you step back. You do not need to submit your boundary for group approval. Silence is holy when words would only be used to reopen a door God is shutting. That is why some of you feel a check in your spirit every time you start composing the long message, because heaven knows something you are still trying to be gracious enough to ignore. Some people do not want clarity. They want continued access. Some people do not want truth. They want your availability. Some people do not want to understand the shift. They want to prevent it. And that is why the more you explain, the foggier you feel. Because you are trying to translate a spiritual eviction to people whose only concern is losing your participation. And this is where high-level spiritual maturity matters. You do not need to demonize them. You do not need to expose them. You do not need to create villains to justify a completed season. A mature exit does not turn the past into evil just because it can no longer be your future. That matters because the flesh wants a dramatic reason to leave. The spirit does not always get one. Sometimes the only reason is this: I cannot keep living here and stay clear. That is enough. Sometimes the only reason is this: I leave these interactions more fragmented than when I entered them. That is enough. Sometimes the only reason is this: I keep feeling God pull me inward every time I try to force myself outward. That is enough. You do not need a scandal to justify obedience, and this is why your exit has to stay sacred. Not loud, not petty, not performative, sacred. There is a difference between closure and overexposure. There is a difference between honesty and self-betrayal. There is a difference between kindness and access. And in this season, God is teaching you all three. So let me give you the graceful exit framework. Not so you can disappear with bitterness. Not so you can punish anybody. But so you can leave with your oil intact. The first part is clarity. Tell yourself the truth before you try to say anything to anyone else. Stop using vague language with your own soul. Stop saying, maybe I am just tired. Maybe I am just in a weird mood. Maybe I need to push through. Maybe I am overthinking this. Maybe I owe them one more chance to experience the old version of me. No, name it. This environment is no longer healthy for my spirit. This access is too expensive for my peace. This pattern keeps requiring self-abandonment. This room may not be evil, but it is no longer mine. Clarity is mercy because confusion keeps you available to what you already know is draining you. The second part is reduction. You do not always have to announce an exit before you begin one. Sometimes the holiest move is reduced access. Shorter replies, fewer appearances, less emotional labor, less volunteering, less rescuing, less automatic. Yes. You do not have to slam the door to stop living in the hallway. Reduction breaks the addiction to over-availability. Reduction lets your nervous system breathe. Reduction lets your nervous system breathe. Reduction gives your spirit room to hear itself again. And that matters because some of you have not actually been hearing your own soul. You have only been hearing the noise created by constant contact, constant expectations, constant explaining, constant emotional management. The third part is restraint. This is where many people lose power. They start strong, but then guilt starts talking. Then loneliness starts talking. Then curiosity starts talking. Then they hear rumors. Then they hear they were called distant. Then they hear someone say they changed. Then they hear the little accusation, "See, you should have explained more." And suddenly they're back in the old cycle, sending paragraphs, clarifying intentions, revisiting closed doors, trying to clean up narratives they were never supposed to control. Do not do that. Restraint means letting people have incomplete information if complete information would still not produce respect. Restraint means not feeding every misunderstanding. Restraint means not chasing your image through every room you have outgrown. Restraint means accepting that some people will build a story because your silence does not serve them. Let them. Your assignment is not to be perfectly interpreted by every past connection. Your assignment is to remain aligned. The fourth part is blessing without return. This is the mature part. You do not curse completed seasons. You do not spit on what once helped you. You do not rewrite history just because you cannot revisit it. You bless what was. You thank God for what was real. You release what is over. And you do not go back because gratitude and re-entry are not the same thing. This is where many empathetic people get trapped. They think if they still love someone, they must still remain fully accessible to them. No, love does not always mean closeness. Care does not always mean contact. Honor does not always mean continued exposure. Sometimes the most mature love is distance without bitterness. And if that sentence just hit your spirit, hold on to it. Distance without bitterness. That is the tone of this season. Not rage, not revenge, not superiority. Distance without bitterness. Because the people you are leaving behind are not always enemies. Many of them are simply witnesses to a version of you that has reached its end. And once you understand that, your exit becomes cleaner. You stop trying to prove they were terrible. You stop needing them to fail dramatically so you can feel justified. You stop collecting evidence for your departure. You simply obey the end of the season. That is power. And here is something else you need to know. There will be moments in this transition where loneliness tries to impersonate regret. Watch that carefully. Just because you missed something does not mean you were supposed to stay in it. Just because the room was familiar does not mean it was fruitful. Just because you remember the warmth does not mean the climate still fits. This is how many people go back, not because God reopened the door, because the silence got loud, because Friday night felt empty, because the phone got quiet, because the ego panicked when nobody was pulling on them, because the heart felt the ache of being between worlds. And that in-between place can be so uncomfortable that you start romanticizing what used to drain you. You remember the laughter, but forget the recovery. You remember the history, but forget the heaviness. You remember the invitation, but forget the internal dread before you went. You remember the familiarity, but forget how foreign you felt while sitting right there in the middle of it. This is why you have to guard your memory. Do not let nostalgia lie to you. The fact that something once fit does not mean it still carries your life. The fact that you once belonged there does not mean you still breathe there. And that is what this really comes down to. Breath. Can you breathe there? Can your spirit breathe there? Can your honesty breathe there? Can your peace breathe there? Can your prayer life breathe there? Can the version of you God is forming breathe there? If not, then your exit is not cruelty. It is survival. And the part nobody talks about enough is that spiritual suffocation rarely looks dramatic from the outside. From the outside, it looks like ordinary dinners, harmless jokes, old routines, familiar offices, normal traditions, recurring invitations, people saying, "We miss you, come by." It's not that deep, but inside your spirit, it is deep. Because every return requires compression. Every appearance requires editing. Every conversation requires filtering. Every visit requires a costume. And eventually, God loves you too much to let you keep living costumed. That is the divine eviction notice. The costume starts choking you. The room starts tiring you. The role starts collapsing. The old access starts feeling invasive. And then heaven says enough. Not because you hate them. Because I love you too much to let you keep disappearing in places that no longer honor what I planted in you. This is also why rumors cannot be your compass. People will talk. Some will say you got distant. Some will say you think you are better. Some will say you forgot who was there for you. Some will say you became too spiritual. Some will say you got weird, private, sensitive, hard to reach. Let them talk. People often call it pride when they can no longer control your access. People often call it distance when they no longer receive your overfunctioning. People often call it change when they are grieving the convenience of your old boundaries. You cannot build your next season on the need to be favorably narrated by people from your last one. That need will destroy your freedom. And this is where your spine has to strengthen, because the real test of this season is not whether you can feel the shift. You already do. The test is whether you can honor the shift without constant external validation. Can you obey before the new people arrive? Can you hold your boundary before your new environment becomes visible? Can you survive the quiet middle without crawling back into old rooms for emotional oxygen? That is the test, and it matters more than you realize, because this emptying is not meaningless. This emptying is making space, not dead space, sacred space, pulled back space, consecrated space. The kind of space where your soul can stop reacting long enough to recognize what truly belongs in your life now. But I'm not going to fully open that door yet, because before the new can be trusted, the old must be released cleanly. And in the next part, we're going to talk about the vacuum effect, why this empty space is already calling in your aligned people, and how to release the past without bitterness so you can walk into the new territory without looking over your shoulder. Now we can say what the empty space actually is. It is not failure. It is not punishment. It is not proof that you made the wrong choice. It is not the universe mocking you with silence after you finally obeyed. It is the vacuum effect. And if you understand this, you will stop panicking every time your life gets quieter after you release what no longer fits. When God removes you from an old room, He does not leave the space around you meaningless. He creates a holy vacancy, a cleared atmosphere, a protected gap, and that gap is not dead. It is active. It is pulling. It is making demands on your future. It is calling in what could not locate you while you were still overexposed to what had already ended. This is why some of you feel such a strange mixture right now. Relief and grief, peace and loneliness, clarity and ache. You finally pulled back and part of you can breathe again. But another part of you is unsettled because the noise is gone. The patterns are broken. The familiar reach has been interrupted. And now you are standing in a quieter life than you expected. Do not misread that quiet. That quiet is not emptiness the way fear describes emptiness. That quiet is availability. You have become available to hear differently. Available to see differently. Available to notice who actually honors your spirit. Available to detect who only knew how to access your labor. Available to receive what could never land while all your doors were still open to expired demands. This is the part many people sabotage. They feel the ache of the vacuum and they rush to fill it. They text back too fast. They reopen old conversations too soon. They accept invitations their spirit already rejected. They overbook themselves so they do not have to feel the awkwardness of transition. They crawl back into noise just to avoid meeting themselves in the quiet. Do not do that. The vacuum is not your enemy. The vacuum is part of the miracle. Because what is being pulled into your life next does not enter through chaos. It enters through cleared space. And the reason this feels so unfamiliar is that many of you have spent years living in reaction, managing people, managing tone, managing emotions, managing access, managing misunderstandings, managing invitations, managing who feels neglected, managing who feels seen, managing who feels prioritized, managing entire rooms with your sensitivity, your empathy, your explanations, your emotional labor. But now God is breaking that pattern. Now He is teaching you that peace is not selfish, space is not cruelty, privacy is not pride, and quiet is not abandonment. Quiet is where the new voices become audible. Let that settle. Because the tribe you are praying for does not respond to the old frequency you had to survive in. The people aligned with your next territory will not require the same costume. They will not need you edited down to tolerate you. They will not need your exhaustion to feel connected to you. They will not need your silence to feel comfortable in your presence. They will recognize you without asking you to reduce. They will respect what the old room kept trying to smooth over. They will hear the language in you that old environments kept treating like too much. But before those people can be trusted, you have to become the kind of person who no longer panics in clean space. This is what God is building right now. Not just a new circle, a new capacity. The capacity to remain unbothered while old doors close. The capacity to stop chasing what no longer chooses your peace. The capacity to sit in sacred solitude without calling it loss. The capacity to believe that less noise can actually mean more alignment. And this is where your faith has to mature. Because immature faith says, I will trust this transition once the new people show up. Mature faith says, I will honor this transition before there is visible evidence, because the peace itself is already evidence. The peace is the proof. The reduction in confusion is the proof. The return of your internal clarity is the proof. The fact that you no longer need to force yourself into spaces your body has been resisting is the proof. The fact that you can finally hear your own thoughts again is the proof. The fact that your prayer life is getting stronger in private is the proof. The fact that your energy is no longer leaking in 10 directions is the proof. And this is why rumors lose power when you become grounded in what God is doing. Let them say you disappeared. You know you did not disappear. You returned to yourself. Let them say you changed. You know you changed because truth matured in you. Let them say you got distant. You know distance was necessary because your spirit was being suffocated by constant false closeness. Let them build their little story. You are building a life, and those are not the same thing. Look at what is already happening in you. You are becoming harder to guilt. You are becoming slower to over-explain. You are becoming more protective of your mornings, your peace, your attention, your home, your conversations, your body, your voice, your discernment. That is not you becoming harsh. That is you finally understanding that your life has gates. Everything sacred has gates. Everything valuable has gates. Everything anointed has gates. And if you keep letting expired people, expired rhythms, and expired obligations wander through every opening in your life, you will keep calling leakage loyalty. No more. This is the season where your small, clean space becomes more precious than public understanding. This is the season where a little peace becomes more valuable than a lot of company. This is the season where you stop mistaking constant access for real connection, because real connection does not drain your soul to keep itself alive. Real connection does not punish your honesty. Real connection does not require you to become less distinct. Real connection does not make you recover from being yourself. And when your new people come, you will feel the difference. You will not have to force your laugh. You will not have to rehearse your sentence before you say it. You will not have to apologize for your sensitivity. You will not have to shrink your revelation so nobody feels uncomfortable. You will not have to leave wondering why everything in you feels dimmer. You will recognize aligned connection by what it does not demand from you. It does not demand disguise. It does not demand fragmentation. It does not demand emotional self-erasure. It does not demand the old room's version of loyalty. That is the new territory. And notice, it is not only people. Sometimes your new territory is a new rhythm, a new home atmosphere, a new prayer discipline, a new work environment, a new way of protecting your evenings, a new relationship with your phone, a new level of non-response, a new willingness to let silence do its work. Sometimes the territory shifts before the tribe arrives. Sometimes the tribe arrives because the territory shifted first. That is why this phase matters so much. Because if you do not honor the cleared ground, you will recreate the old room inside a new place. You will bring the same over-explaining into the next circle. You will bring the same guilt into the next assignment. You will bring the same undisciplined access into the next relationship. You will bring the same fear of being misunderstood into the next environment. And then you will wonder why the new place still feels heavy. So no, we are not only celebrating that old doors are closing. We are maturing your stewardship. We are training your discernment. We are teaching your spirit how to live in a room that does not require your diminishment. That takes unlearning. It takes practice. It takes holy restraint. It takes the courage to stop overfeeding places that no longer feed your life. And it also takes one more thing: release without bitterness. Because if you leave physically but keep rehearsing offense emotionally, the old room still lives in you. If you keep replaying what they said, what they did not understand, what they assumed, what they called you, what they expected, what they took for granted, then your body may have exited, but your spirit is still dragging furniture out of the old room one piece at a time. No, Leave clean, leave clear, leave blessed. You are not walking into your next territory carrying smoke from the last one. You are not taking resentment into a room God prepared for peace. You are not going to spend your new season proving old people wrong. That is beneath you now. You do not need revenge to validate your exit. You do not need their regret to confirm your worth. You do not need their apology to begin breathing again. You do not need their understanding to receive what God has next. This is freedom, real freedom, not the loud kind, the deep kind, the kind that no longer twitches every time an old name appears, the kind that no longer collapses because somebody misread the transition, the kind that does not need to post cryptic messages to feel powerful, the kind that does not announce every boundary, the kind that simply walks with God until the old room no longer has authority over the nervous system, the imagination, or the appetite. That is what I want for you, not just physical distance. Internal release, so let us do that now, not with drama, with authority, not with hatred, with maturity, not with blame, with truth. Say this in your spirit. Father, I release every room that was only meant for a season. I release every table where I had to shrink to stay welcome. I release every pattern that trained me to call exhaustion love. I release every attachment built on access instead of alignment. I release the guilt of leaving people who were part of my past, but not part of my next. I release the fear that I am too difficult to love because I finally need peace. I release the need to be fully understood by those committed to the old version of me. I release the pressure to keep explaining what you already made clear. I bless what was real. I honor what was learned. I refuse bitterness. I refuse pettiness. I refuse the urge to go back just because the silence feels unfamiliar. I refuse to crawl into old rooms just to avoid the holy ache of transition. Clean my memory from false nostalgia. Clean my mouth from unnecessary explanation. Clean my heart from hidden resentment. Teach me how to leave with grace. Teach me how to protect what you are growing in me. Teach me how to recognize aligned people without desperation. Teach me how to trust the quiet. Teach me how to remain still while the new territory forms around me. I accept that some doors must close without a speech. I accept that some people will misunderstand my absence. I accept that peace is sacred. I accept that my life has gates. I accept that solitude is not rejection. I accept that this clearing is preparation. I accept that you are not stripping me down to leave me empty. You are making room. You are making room for language that matches me. You are making room for people who do not need my fragmentation. You are making room for assignment, peace, clarity, dignity, and clean connection. I bless the old room and I leave it. I do not leave angry. I do not leave guilty. I do not leave confused. I leave aware. I leave grateful. I leave led. And I declare that what you remove, you replace at the right time. What you close with wisdom. What you prepare with precision. And while I wait, I will not panic. I will guard my oil. I will protect my peace. I will honor the transition. I will not force re-entry into what you have completed. I am not abandoned. I am being repositioned. I am not too much. I am becoming honest. I am not losing love. I am losing compression. I'm not being exiled. I am being upgraded. In Jesus' name, amen. Now breathe, really breathe. Notice what just happened. That tightness in your chest is not random either. For some of you, it is the first crack in a guilt structure that has been controlling your decisions for years. For some of you, this is the first time you have given yourself divine permission to stop over-functioning in rooms that drain your life. For some of you, this is the moment the exit became holy instead of shameful. And that changes everything. Because now you do not have to keep checking whether you are allowed to protect your peace. You are. You do not have to keep asking whether the exhaustion was real. It was. You do not have to keep apologizing for not fitting where your spirit cannot breathe. You do not fit there anymore because you were not meant to. That chapter completed its work. Now let it close with dignity. Let the rumors fade without chasing them. Let the text sit without panic. Let the invitations pass without self-accusation. Let the family room feel different without forcing your old personality back into the chair. Let the quiet teach you. Let the vacuum work. Let the new people find the real you, not the edited survival version. And until they do, protect your smaller space like it matters. Because it does. Protect your mornings. Protect your peace after conversation. Protect your no. Protect your slowness. Protect your clarity. Protect the version of you that no longer wants to perform closeness where there is no true alignment. This is not a downgrade. This is threshold living. This is the hallway before the unveiling. This is the clean space before the new furniture arrives. This is the pause before the next territory recognizes your name. Do not despise it. Do not rush it. Do not fill it with noise just because it feels unfamiliar. Stand still in it. Let God finish the separation. Let God detox your appetite for old rooms. Let God teach your spirit what peace feels like when it is not constantly interrupted. And remember this when the lonely hour comes, when the phone feels too quiet, when nostalgia starts rehearsing its little lies, when guilt tries to dress itself up as kindness, when old voices try to tempt you back into over-explaining. Solitude is not where your life ends. Solitude is the lobby before the throne room. If you are leaving the old room with peace, comment "I receive the new room," like this video, and subscribe for the next word God sends to confirm your transition.